Hello, and welcome to the NY Sun PV Trainers Network podcast series. My name is Bill Obercare. I am a New York State Solar Ombudsman with Sustainable CUNY of the City University of New York. And together with NTech Engineering and Meister Consultants Group, and a host of academic institutions throughout New York State, we comprise the New York Sun PV Trainers Network, funded by NYSERDA. Today I'm going to be talking to you folks about solar energy myths, and let's dive right in. The first myth to address is that there's not enough sun in New York for solar PV to be able to work. Many think that it's too cloudy, too cold, or too snowy in New York for solar to work. In fact, all of New York receives more sunlight than Germany and is on par with Spain, as you can see by the solar radiation map. Germany has the most solar installed by any country, and at certain times of day can get 50% of its electricity from solar. Solar works everywhere in New York. Snow melts quickly off the dark-colored panels, and panels operate most efficiently during cool, sunny days. A system installed in New York will produce more than 80% of what a similar system would produce in Florida. So as you can see, the world market leader gets less solar resource than the state of Alaska. And if you compare New York to Spain on the right, we're on par with sunny Spain in terms of our solar resource here in New York. Another myth that is worth addressing, the myth that solar systems always have a high upfront cost. In order to dispel this myth, it's good to take a look at the three general ownership options available for solar energy systems. The first is third-party ownership. Third-party ownership options for solar energy systems typically do not have any upfront cost at all. There are two types of third-party ownership that we generally see in the solar market. The first is a lease, which is a flat monthly fee for the use of the solar array and the energy bill credits that it produces. The second third-party ownership type is a power purchase agreement, commonly referred to as a PPA. Under those agreements, the customer pays per kilowatt hour of solar electricity consumed from the solar array. So instead of straight absorption of the net metering credits provided by the solar energy system, the solar energy customer is paying a developer who maintains ownership of the system, maintains and owns the systems, and then is able to capitalize on the incentives available through the federal government in order to be able to reduce the price of the lease or the power purchase agreement to the customer. The next type of financing option that we see commonly in New York for solar is a solar loan. Some of those loans can be available for $0 down. Typically, they have relatively low interest rates as well. NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, has loan information available at the link that you can see on the screen, ny-sun.ny.gov/get-solar/ny-sun-financing. If you click that link, you will be able to learn detailed information about NYSERDA's loan and financing options for solar energy. The final mode of ownership that we see in New York State is the cash purchase, also called a direct purchase. This is where the myth that solar always has a high upfront cost comes from. Cash purchases do tend to have that high upfront cost for your solar array, but they also tend to be the best overall investment. The direct purchase of a solar energy system will typically yield the highest return on investment for the solar customer. Another myth that we see a lot in the solar industry here in New York is that solar PV technology will become outdated. Now, this is quite a busy chart, but we're really including it in this presentation to illustrate one point. If you look at the slope of all of the lines on this chart, they are very gradual slopes. As you can see, the purple lines at the top level off at around 1995, as well as the blue lines below Green lines have a spike around 1995 and then level off, and you see the pattern in the National Renewable Energy Laboratories chart here. This chart outlines solar cell efficiencies. Generally, the way that solar technology improves is in terms of efficiency. To continue on this myth, solar PV technology is not like other technologies on the market. So the way we listen to music, the way we communicate, the way we're entertained, the way we compute are very, very different in terms of how they evolved when compared to solar PV technology. As you saw by the previous chart, solar PV technology tends to improve incrementally over long periods of time, as opposed to these other technologies which tend to improve in large leaps over short periods of time. Technological advancements are made in terms of efficiency. Efficiency is the panel's ability to convert sunlight into electricity. The end product of a solar panel is a kilowatt hour of electricity. No matter how efficient the solar panel is, that will always be the end product. A kilowatt hour is the amount of energy produced by a PV system and consumed over time. Increases in solar panel efficiency translate to less square feet required for the same amount of kilowatt hour production. If a significant amount of usage can be offset by a user's current amount of available space for an on-site solar array or a local share solar installation, it does not make sense to wait. So to boil that down into a simpler point, increases in solar PV efficiency only reduce the amount of space that is required to produce the same amount of electricity. So if you have enough space to produce a substantial amount of electricity right now, then it does not make sense to wait. The reason it doesn't make sense to wait is because it is not typically financially advantageous to do so. Waiting for PV technology improvements comes with an opportunity cost. That opportunity cost is money spent on utility bills while waiting for the technology to improve. So what that means is in the years that you're waiting for solar PV technology to improve, which again happens incrementally over long periods of time, you're spending money on your utility bills on a month-to-month basis in that period, and that's money that you could be saving if you would go ahead and install right now. Now, the other opportunity cost involved in waiting for the technology to improve is that current federal, state, and local incentives will sunset over the next few years. We touched on this briefly when discussing the fact that there is enough sun in New York for solar energy, but a lot of folks still have concerns that solar panels do not work in the snow. That is also a myth. Now, solar panels will not produce electricity if completely covered in snow, but there are quite a few things that we can consider when looking at how solar panels interact with snowfall. Snow slides easily off of panels, and your panels will likely be located in the sunniest spot on your roof. Once the snow on your panels melts, again, this usually happens pretty quickly, your panels will resume electricity production. Typically, solar installers will factor decades of historical weather data into your system's projected production. So the estimate that you receive from your installer will most likely factor in reduced system production due to snow. Your installer will typically ensure that your solar panels are in the best position to get the maximum amount of sunlight possible. Usually your system will be installed facing the south, southeast, or southwest. Since the panels are smooth, snow doesn't stick to them like it would to rough roof shingles, so it tends to melt or slide away quickly and easily on its own, as you can see in the image to the right. If you'll notice, there's snow covering the rest of the roof, but those solar panels, the snow has already receded off of the panels. So once that snow melts and those panels are exposed to direct sunlight again, that electricity production is going to ramp back up, and those panels will be saving you money on your energy bills once again. A lot of folks tend to think that the way that solar works as an investment is that the utility writes a check for the solar energy that your system produces. Now, in the state of New York, that's not necessarily true. We have a process or a policy called net metering, whereby excess or unused power produced by the solar array travels back into the utility grid when it is not being consumed on-site at the home. The utility then issues kilowatt-hour credits for each kilowatt-hour of excess power that the solar energy system produces. Those credits are then issued to your account through your utility and can offset your future kilowatt-hour usage, whether it's at night or on a cloudy day or in the early morning. Now, if you take a look at the image below, we'll see how net metering works throughout the course of the year. Net metering credits, if there is an excess at the end of a particular month, will roll over to the next month. We'll get into that a little more in the next slide, but typically, as you can see by the animation, in the month of October, you're generating net metering credits that will carry over into the month of November to offset that slight amount of usage where the system is not producing as much as the household is consuming. And then conversely, in summer months where electricity use tends to be a lot higher, the sun also is out in the sky longer and producing more energy. So although in August, in this example, the solar energy system is not offsetting all of the household's consumption in the month of August, the household is only being billed for that very small portion of usage in excess of what the solar energy system produced for that month. So even in the month of August, where there still are kilowatt-hour charges on that utility bill, they will be substantially reduced by virtue of the solar PV system. Let's take a look at how that would look on your utility bill. So you can see at the top, we've got a couple of meter readings and then a total usage for 32 days in kilowatt hours. In this particular example, the household produced with the solar energy system 100 more kilowatt hours than the household consumed in this month. So we go on down the line with that 100 kilowatt hour credit, and you see there's a prior credit from the previous month of 50 kilowatt hours. Now, those credits will roll over and combine with the new net metering credits to have a new cumulative credit of 150 kilowatt hours to take into the following month, which in this example would be the month of August. Now, these credits will continue to roll over until the annual reconciliation month or anniversary month. At this point, the utility will in fact write a check for solar, but the excess credits at the end of the year are bought out by the utility at what's known as the avoided cost of power rate. Now, the avoided cost of power rate is lower than the market price or the retail value of those kilowatt hours. So financially, it's in the solar PV owner's best interest to maximize the value of those net metering credits, of those kilowatt hour credits on a one-to-one basis in the volumetric offset described in this example. It does not make financial sense to have excess net metering credits at this anniversary month during the reconciliation period because the price that the utility is paying the customer for those excess credits is below the market value of those credits. Now, it ties into this myth that solar can also reduce your electric bill to zero. Now, that is not the case. This basic service charge cannot be offset with solar. That is the cost of maintaining and using the electricity grid. The only costs that can be offset with solar are costs directly tied to kilowatt hours. So you'll see typically supply and delivery charges, but any charge that is directly tied to a kilowatt hour of consumption can be offset by solar. Any charge that is not tied to a kilowatt hour of consumption typically cannot be offset by solar. For more information on net metering, Sustainable CUNY of the City University of New York has an educational video on both commercial and residential net metering. I urge folks to take a look at that video, and the link is in the bottom of this slide. And you'll see the total amount due at the end of the month in this particular example, given the net metering credits and the basic service charge, will just be that basic service charge and a few taxes, the government surcharges that are included also in that bottom number. On to another common myth that we hear is that solar harms local economies. Now that is certainly not true. If you take a look at this map, this is New York State solar jobs, solar industry jobs by county. So down in Suffolk County on Long Island, it looks like there are 801 plus jobs, as well as New York County and Nassau. And then throughout the state, there are varying degrees of, or varying amounts of solar jobs in our counties in the state of New York. Now, the town hall debate in late 2015 addressing a proposed new solar farm in Woodland, North Carolina that is now infamous due to those viral articles that went around in December 2015 about solar panels sucking up all the energy for the sun. Some folks write that off as a joke and laugh at it, but amid that debate, other community members raised what may have appeared to be more reasonable concerns. According to Snopes, some residents of Woodland, North Carolina worried that the burgeoning solar industry would further depress the local economy. One resident claimed that she has watched the town slowly become a ghost town with no job opportunities for young people. Well, as of November 2015, the solar industry employs more than 200,000 Americans, showing a 123% increase since 2010. Nationwide, the solar industry employs 3 times more Americans than coal mining and added nearly 50% more jobs in 2014 than oil and gas pipeline construction and petroleum and natural gas extraction. These employees work at over 8,750 companies nationally, and the vast majority of those are small businesses in all 50 states, according to some excellent research done by the Solar Foundation. Let's take a more granular look at New York, according to Solar Foundation research. New York solar jobs increased by 40% in 2014 over the previous year to employ a total of 8,250 total workers, making it rank 4th in the nation for solar jobs. So New York for solar industry jobs is well ahead of the rest of the country, ranking 4th when compared to all the other states in the nation. As you can see from the table on the right, these jobs tend to be living wage jobs that cannot be outsourced. Not like folks can ship their houses over to China to have the panels installed and then have them shipped back. These jobs, by their very nature, must be in the local communities and local to New York. And on the manufacturing side of solar for New York, Solar City's factory under construction in Buffalo is expected to create 5,000 new jobs, 3,000 of which will be based in the western New York region, according to a recent New York Times article. So you can see that to address the myth that solar harms local economies, in fact, the opposite is true. Solar can be a great boon for local economies due to the very nature of the solar industry and the fact that those jobs will necessarily be kept in local communities. On to another fairly common myth, solar harms low-income communities. That's what a few folks have been saying. Now, this is not true. All utility customers still pay that basic service charge that we took a look at in the second net metering slide. Even after you install solar, those basic upkeep charges for the electric grid, paying for the use of the utility grid, are still built into the solar customer's bills. Those charges cannot be offset by a solar energy array. So it's a common argument among some circles that those folks who install solar on their homes are kind of defraying the cost of the upkeep of the grid to low-income communities who cannot afford solar, and that is not true because the cost of the upkeep of the grid is not offset by solar. Additionally, solar reduces the need to build new expensive power plants. So in building those new expensive power plants, typically the cost of construction and the cost of materials is passed on to the consumers in the price of electricity. Now, the more folks who install solar and are producing their own electricity and feeding electricity back onto the grid, the less need there is to build those large, expensive power plants to keep up with the peak load for the utility grid. Solar also reduces local pollution from fossil fuels that tend to disproportionately affect low-income communities. So solar being a green technology with no GHG emissions, which we will discuss in a little more depth later on in the podcast, that can reduce that pollution that seems to be disproportionately affecting low-income communities. And in addition, NYSERDA is offering the Affordable Solar Program to LMI, or low to moderate income customers. More details about that program are available on NYSERDA's website, and you can find that by accessing the link below. Well, this is a myth that is becoming a lot more prevalent with the advent of shared solar in the state of New York. The myth is that municipalities benefit by taxing solar. Well, let's take a deeper look at this. First of all, more than 92% of all jurisdictions in New York continue to offer an exemption from real property taxes. So the way that that works is New York State has a real property tax exemption, Real Property Tax Law, Section 487. Municipalities are automatically opted into this property tax exemption, but because New York is a home rule state, municipalities do have the option to opt out of that tax exemption. More than 92% of the jurisdictions throughout the state remain opted in for myriad reasons. Many municipalities are actually investing in solar as well by recognizing the benefit of solar energy saving the municipality and therefore the taxpayers' money, solar energy and the solar industry creating jobs in the local communities, and in response to greenhouse gas emissions targets, reduction targets, many municipalities have begun investing in solar energy themselves. Solar, as I said before, can bring savings to municipal operations and educational opportunities for the community and schools. So when we're looking at taxpayer-funded electricity bills, like on municipal properties and in schools, the cheaper electricity produced by solar energy systems can really, really benefit the taxpayers and save some money by being able to deliver that electricity to these taxpayer-funded buildings at a cheaper rate. And also, solar installations on schools will double as an excellent STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, learning opportunity and curriculum builder for the students of those schools. And lastly, investment in solar, as we covered in the last two slides, brings in local jobs, consumer spending, and economic growth. The New York Sun PV Trainers Network will be releasing a more in-depth fact sheet on the real property tax exemption, Section 487 for New York, in the late spring of 2016. So make sure to check the PV Trainers Network if the property tax exemption is of particular interest to you. Another myth that we see pretty commonly is that solar is not possible in historic districts. Solar can be integrated into a historic district without harming the character of the building or the performance of the installation. There are many ways to do this. Often solar can be installed directly on the roof so that it cannot be seen from street level in a historic district, or solar can be set back so that it's not visible from street level. And as you can see in the image on the right, those are some solar shingles called Building Integrated PV, or BIPV for short, and that's one of many ways, like the few others that I mentioned before, to balance solar energy production with the historic character of a neighborhood. Now, solar is typically treated like any other proposed change or alteration to a building in a historic district. There are variances and permits to file with the local historic district or landmark authorities, and those installations are subject to approval by those authorities. Now, local commission has the power to adopt guidelines for solar installations in historic districts to define exactly how a particular community would like to balance that historic character with that solar energy production. And if this is of particular interest to folks, I would urge you to access the link at the bottom of this slide to view the PV Trainers Network webinar completely devoted to solar in historic districts. A lot of detailed information in that webinar. All right, another myth that we hear fairly commonly is that condos, co-ops, and other multifamily buildings can't go solar. Well, many multifamily buildings throughout New York State already have solar arrays. One step ahead. The electric meter configuration, i.e. whether it's an individually metered building, sub-metered building, or a master meter building of a multifamily building, can affect the potential size and configuration of a solar energy system. The electric rate categorization, also called a utility tariff, of your building's electric meter will significantly impact the potential savings and payback of solar. Solar does not typically reduce demand charges. Solar can be combined with energy efficiency to reduce the size of the solar array needed to offset the building's energy usage. So if you have a relatively small building with a lot of families living in it, a combination of energy efficiency and a solar array can be a very effective tool for offsetting the energy usage of the building. Another more recently available option for multifamily buildings is a shared solar array specifically for that building. Shared solar array is an option that will allow residents to opt in or opt out of participating in the solar array through a process called community net metering. That way the entire condo, co-op, or other multifamily building doesn't need to invest in solar. Only the folks who are living in the building who choose to invest in solar will be able to do so. And for more information on solar and multifamily buildings, I urge you to check out Sustainable CUNY's New York State Multifamily Solar Guide, which is available through the link below, and there is also a New York City Multifamily Solar Guide available through Sustainable CUNY. Right, now this is a very common myth that we see in the solar market, and that myth is that solar arrays cause fires. That is not true. Solar arrays rarely, if ever, cause fires. PV arrays go through multiple inspections to ensure code compliance and safety. Just like any other piece of electrical equipment, there are a lot of eyes on a solar installation to make sure that it will not cause a fire. There are a lot of safeguards in place before a PV system is allowed to become operational to be sure that it will not cause a fire. Typically, where the myth that solar arrays cause fires stems from is the reality of the situation that solar can present additional challenges to first responders if they're attached to a building that is on fire. The main issues in protecting the safety of first responders and balancing that with a PV array is ensuring that those first responders can safely and easily access the roof and have adequate space to ventilate the building. Fire codes are being updated to reflect safety concerns. As you can see to the image on the left, there are clear path rules that ensure that first responders have the ability and the space to traverse and ventilate the building. The paths are outlined in green, and this is an example of a fire code compliant building as of January 2016. Trainings for first responders on how to safely interact with PV systems are also an important part of the mix. Now, through the PV Trainers Network, we do offer these trainings. We have a fire and safety considerations for solar PV. You can either access the recorded webinar version of that training through the link below, or you can submit a training request to have PVTN's fire safety experts come to your community and train the first responders in your community on how to safely interact with solar PV systems. Another very common and cutting-edge myth that we see, or a myth with the potential to be cutting-edge, is that folks believe that they will not lose power during a power outage. Now, this is a myth. That is not true. Currently, most solar electric systems are grid-tied. Interconnecting your solar array to the grid allows for net metering, as we discussed earlier. Since PV arrays often are sending electricity back into the grid, it is important to shut the system down in the event of a power outage. The reason for this is simple. Utility workers need to be able to repair damaged power lines in the event of an outage. And it is not safe for those workers if the PV array is sending electricity back into the grid through those wires during this process. Now, there is a way for solar PV to be resilient and to be able to provide emergency power in the event of a power outage, and that is through a battery backup. Though energy storage technology is improving reasonably quickly, it is not currently economically feasible to pursue a solar plus storage option in most market segments. Resilient solar plus storage is expected to play a key role in response to weather emergencies for New York in the near future. Sustainable CUNY has a DG Hub program that is working to integrate resilient solar and storage technology into New York City's infrastructure and build a pathway and a plan for adoption. And it is also important to differentiate between residential and commercial storage. Commercial energy storage is often economical, but residential solar and storage systems have no way to monetize that stored energy. Now, if this is of particular interest to you, I urge you to check out PVTN's Resilient Solar podcast. You can access that through the link at the bottom of the slide. Another myth that is relatively common is that the size of the solar array is determined by the size of the roof. That's not necessarily true for a number of reasons. There are a couple of other factors right off the bat. You've got your annual electricity usage and the orientation of your roof. The New York Sun incentive eligibility requirements for residential systems are that the systems cannot be sized to generate more than 110% of historical annual usage for the building. So in order to qualify for NYSERDA's megawatt block incentive, the system cannot be sized to generate more than 110% of the building's historical annual usage. And then as we discussed earlier, those excess net metering credits are bought out at that avoided cost of power rate at the end of the year, which is below the market retail value. So it doesn't really make financial sense to be producing more electricity than the building is using over the course of a year. The orientation of the roof also factors into the size of the system. Now, south-facing roof is ideal, and southeast and southwest facing roofs are also good. But typically, since we're in the northern hemisphere, having panels that face south will give them optimal sun exposure. Now we want to get into the image on the right. Obstructions and shading can also factor the size of the PV array. Now you can see the little arrow there. It's pointing to a couple obstructions on the roof, and there's some shade from a neighboring building over on the side. Now, due to the fire clear path rules that we discussed in a previous slide, there needs to be an adequate amount of space around those obstructions, and obviously the panels cannot go on the obstructions themselves. And also the panels are not going to be completely functional or be able to maintain optimal production if they're placed in that shady area as well. So you want to estimate 100 square feet of unobstructed roof space per kilowatt capacity of solar. That's generally a good rule of thumb for residential solar. Now, there are ways around some of the obstructions. most notably a canopy system, whereby raising the solar installation 9 feet off of the roof can really help to mitigate shading issues, and it provides first responders enough room to get under the solar array to be able to move back and forth across the top of the building and ventilate the building in the event of an emergency. Now this is a myth that is quite common, even though it might seem a little far-fetched at first glance, and that's the myth that electromagnetic fields from solar panels can cause cancer. Now, according to the study conducted by the state of Oregon, the strength of electromagnetic fields produced by photovoltaic systems do not approach levels considered harmful to human health as established by the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. Now, that is in a report done by the state of Oregon's Department of Transportation. There is no evidence that links solar panels, inverters, or any radio frequency waves emitted from solar-related hardware to cancer. Now, if you take a look at the table below, on the column at the very right, you'll see the minimum threshold for harmful electromagnetic fields to human health. And these are by very conservative standards. Now, these are measured in milligauss, which is the typical measurement for an electromagnetic field. Now, if you take a look at the milligauss emitted by the PV modules, the inverter, and the grid interconnection, those numbers, the milligauss emitted by those electromagnetic fields are well below the lowest possible harmful threshold to human health. So as you can see, there's no evidence to support the theory that electromagnetic fields from solar panels cause cancer. In fact, the evidence that we do have points to the contrary. We want to get into another two-part myth, and that's that solar has harmful environmental impacts. Now, in terms of land use, large-scale PV arrays can impact land use, and typically for large-scale arrays, SECRA review will be necessary. You can minimize those land use impacts by siting those large solar arrays on lower quality lands like brownfields, capped landfills, Superfund sites, and things of that nature. Now, we hear a lot of concerns about solar and water use. Important to note about solar that it does not use any water in generating electricity. Some water is used in the manufacture of solar PV components, but that is only in the manufacturing stage. There is no water used in the electricity generation phase throughout the lifetime of the solar panels. Now, we also hear concerns pretty commonly about hazardous materials and chemicals going into PV modules. It's important to note that solar PV does not generate any solid, liquid, or gaseous byproducts when producing electricity. So again, for the whole lifetime of that solar array, there is not going to be any solid, liquid, or gaseous byproduct coming from that solar array. Now, the manufacture of PV panels does require some hazardous materials. Those are occupational hazards. The hazards are eliminated once the final product of the PV panel is complete. Manufacturers, folks who manufacture solar panels, companies who manufacture solar panels, follow U.S. laws and other worker safety laws to ensure the safety of this process and in safety of the workers who are manufacturing these panels. Now, continuing the myth that solar has harmful environmental impacts, some folks believe that solar PV generates greenhouse gases when producing electricity. And that is not true. There is no GHG emission from solar PV during electricity production. Now, there is minimal GHG emission associated with the manufacturing, the transportation of the completed PV panels, the installation, the maintenance, the decommissioning, and the dismantlement. So if you take a look at the graph on the right, that's where that negligible amount of greenhouse emissions from solar PV come from. It is not during the generation of electricity, So over the course of that solar panel's lifetime, there are no GHG emissions, but it's just the manufacture, transportation, installation, maintenance, decommissioning, dismantlement that have those pounds of carbon dioxide listed in the chart to the right. And as you can see, that is well below natural gas and coal. So to sum that all up, we'll just say that solar PV life cycle, the cycle of the solar PV, the solar panels, the GHG emissions from the birth of the panel to the point where it's dismantled are very, very minimal. And for more information on this, you can feel free to check out the link at the bottom of the slide. And just to give a wrap up and kind of put the cap on myths, I want to address the idea of taking the media out of context. There are two examples of how satire can play a major role in creating and perpetuating solar energy myths. One article is from a satirical publication called The National Report. The second article is a 1994 article from a Lock Haven University professor in Pennsylvania, Dr. Donald Simonek, which is found on the humor and satire section of his webpage. Though the National Report article was published about 2 years ago, the idea expressed in the headline, that you can see to the right, has gained traction in the international news circuit relatively recently. As I mentioned before, in December of 2015, when folks at a North Carolina town hall meeting made a comment expressing the idea, seemingly in earnest, that solar panels drain the sun's energy. Well, that became an infamous headline very, very quickly in international news. Now, as you can see in the article to the right, the National Report article has that in the headline, and that's a 2013 article. This National Report article attributes these discoveries made by the experts to another satirical website called Wyoming Institute of Technology. And they're using, so it's a satirical website making a satirical headline citing another satirical website for their experts. That's pretty silly, yet still the primary claim in this article somehow has crept back into the zeitgeist about 2 years later with the events that came out of North Carolina in December. Now there's another tongue-in-cheek article, Dr. Simonak's Hazards of Solar Energy, was published way back in '94. This article begins by discussing, quote, known hazards of solar energy. And again, this is found in the humor and satire section of Dr. Simonak's website. Some known hazards, again in quotes, according to this article, are the fact that the sun generates energy by nuclear fusion, the process that gives atomic bombs their destructive power, and the source of the sun's energy is hydrogen, a highly explosive gas that contributed to the Hindenburg disaster. The gist here is that the sun produces energy by a potentially dangerous process from a potentially dangerous element. So harnessing that energy via solar panels is inherently unsafe. By leaving out the fact that the nuclear fusion of hydrogen atoms is occurring about 93 million miles away, the argument may appear specious at a glance when it is, in fact, outright absurd. The article goes on to discuss, quote, unknown hazards, including potential blindness caused by lights powered by solar energy, by using the rationale that the sun is bright, so therefore the lights that solar energy is powering must also be equally bright. Again, pretty silly. The fact that another argument was the fact that we do not fully understand the workings of the sun means we cannot hope to understand solar PV. And another claim is that solar electricity may cause skin cancer if it powers our appliances, based on the rationale that solar radiation can contribute to skin cancer. So if a toaster is powered by energy from the sun, then it must also contribute to skin cancer. Again, pretty ridiculous, absurd, and silly claims, and that's why they're found in the humor section of Lock Haven University's website. They are pretty good for a laugh. But these exact claims came up in a recent blog as recently as 2013 in earnest. The Energy Rescue Guide had presumably good intentions when the author of the blog is reporting this decades-old satire as fact, eliminating the disclaimers accessible through the original blog post. The lesson here is when sources are not properly vetted, misinformation can be shared widely, perpetuating all of these solar energy myths that we've just dispelled. So we've sourced a lot of the information in this podcast, and we'll provide resources in the next slides. If there is an issue of particular interest to you that we outlined in this podcast, please take a deep look at those sources, and we really encourage you to learn more about it. Misinformation can be spread so easily, as you can see by the share button on the article in the screenshot at the right. 340,000 folks had shared that original satirical National Report article that said solar panels drain the sun's energy. So this misinformation in the digital age can get out very, very quickly and cover a lot of ground, again, quickly. So it's important to check sources and make sure that we're vetting these ideas to check out whether or not they are, in fact, just solar energy myths. Now, we've provided some additional resources for folks. We've got the PV Trainers Network website, along with the New York Sun website and NYSERDA. U.S. Department of Energy Solar Foundation has some great information and research about solar jobs, both in New York State and nationally. NYSEA, which is New York Solar Energy Industries Association, has a great webinar on the property tax exemption, and City University of New York, through Sustainable CUNY, has a host of great resources as well. Thank you very much for tuning in to this PV Trainers Network podcast on solar energy myths. If you have questions or would like to ask for clarification on any of the information that was outlined in this podcast, please don't hesitate to contact us at info@training.ny-sun.ny.gov. Thanks again for tuning in.